Hey guys, sitting in my backyard enjoying a little bit of a sunshine this afternoon. And what a wet July we've been having, right? It's always sunshine 1 minute and then the rain rolls in. A couple of weeks ago, we even had tornado up in Barrie. So I hope all those families are getting the support that they need and they're okay. Speaking of the weather, it got me thinking about real estate. And here is the situation. Say you've got a home to sell and all goes well, and on offer day you get a few offers. The winning offer is fantastic, no conditions, and everything that you were hoping to get, all sunshine right there. And obviously we are going to accept it. Here comes the rain. Next day rolls around and the buyer doesn't bring the deposit. Now what? Like, what do you do? Like, what, as a seller, what are your options? What can you do? In my 20 years of doing real estate, questions around the deposit have never come up more than in recent years. Just a few days ago, I went to meet a seller, and during the discussion of the listing agreement, the seller asked me that exact question. Plus, he also asked me this: what happens if the buyer brings the deposit but doesn't close the deal on closing day? Now, these are two very different questions, but they're somewhat related. So today I'm going to address both of them. Now, there could be a few reasons why the winning buyer doesn't want to bring the deposit, but let me list a couple of them. It could be due to the buyer remorse, like they discover something that they overlooked before they put in the offer, or they simply think that they paid too much for the property. And so they decide that, you know what, I'm not gonna bring the deposit on the next day and hopefully I can get out of it. What can the seller do at this point? In order to answer that question, I'm first going to address why we have deposit in the first place. You see, the agreement of purchase and sale is a contract, and in order for a contract to be valid, there only needs to be 6 elements: an offer, an acceptance, a consideration, an intention, capacity, and legality. In the case of buying and selling real estate, the agreement of purchase and sale itself is the offer. And when the seller signs it, there is acceptance. The money to be paid is the consideration, and the promise to transfer title is the intention. So long as both parties are of legal age and mentally capable, we have capacity. Lastly, the purpose of the contract has to be legal. So no, a contract to hire a hitman is not a valid contract. That's it. You can see that deposit is not a requirement for a valid contract. So why do we even have deposits? The purpose of deposit is twofold. Number one, it's security to the seller for the good, faithful performance by the buyer. We want the buyer to have something to lose in case they walk away from the contract. After all, the seller is taking the property off the market once the contract is signed. So if the buyer can walk away easily, then we're going to have problems. Number two, it's the liquidated damage that the seller can claim without proof of any loss if the contract is breached by the buyer. So now let's answer the question of what if the buyer doesn't bring the deposit? For Ontario, in our standard agreement of purchase and sale, the buyer is actually signing the contract under seal and providing a deposit within 24 hours. Now that 24 hours is pre-printed, but oftentimes it's mutually it's changed, and as long as it's mutually agreed, and that's okay. So let's stick with that 24 hours example. If the buyer doesn't bring the deposit by the 23rd hour and 59th minute, then the buyer is in default. Now that doesn't mean the contract is now void. It simply means that the seller now has a couple of options. Option number one is that the seller can give the buyer a little more time to deliver the deposit. Say that the buyer had a car accident, car trouble, whatever, that prevented them from going to the bank or something happened at home, you don't want to kill the deal right then and there. So you give them a little more time to bring the deposit. Second option will be for the seller to immediately list the property and sell it to someone else. There is no obligation for the seller to sign any mutual release before accepting the second offer. The first buyer is now at the mercy of the seller and cannot claim any rights under the agreement. The seller can choose to go after the first buyer for the deposit money that was never delivered. Remember, we said that the deposit is the liquidated damage that the seller can claim without proving a loss. Now, at this point, the seller should be speaking with a litigation lawyer about this situation to see if the deposit is large enough to justify going after. So speaking of the size of the deposit, so what is a good size of deposit to have as a seller? In Ontario, we recommend at least 5% as a deposit amount. Anything less than that would make it very tempting for the buyer to walk away. But keep in mind, too much deposit is also not good. Case laws have proven that anything over 15% could have the court consider that as a penalty instead of a deposit and therefore disallow it. All right, so let's take a look at what happens if the buyer doesn't close the deal on closing day. In this case, the seller is entitled to forfeit the deposit and proceed to relist the property for sale. So if the seller is successful in selling the property for a higher price, then the seller can claim, all the seller can claim is the amount of deposit from the first buyer that didn't close. However, if the seller sells the property for less money, there's a difference, then the seller can go after the first buyer for the difference in price, but keep in mind, the amount of deposit will be counted towards the loss. So meaning you can double dip. So I want to make 5 points to conclude this video. Number one, deposit is not a critical part of the contract, but it is a very crucial part of the contract. Number two, as a seller, you want as much deposit as a buyer is willing to provide. And number three, as the buyer, you want to give as little deposit as the seller is willing to accept. Number four, as the buyer remorse is very expensive. If you don't give the deposit and you've signed under seal, and therefore the seller can come after you for the deposit amount. As a buyer, number five, as a buyer, it is even more expensive not to close a transaction. I always say, beg, borrow, or steal, you have to find a way to close the deal. Many case laws have proven that if you're short on funds or if you think you pay too much, you should still close the deal regardless, and then figure out the next step. Not closing could cost you even more money, more than the difference that you think you overpaid. One last disclaimer though, I'm not a lawyer, so don't take anything I said above as legal advice. When in doubt, when you have serious questions, always check with a competent real estate lawyer. If you have any questions or comments about this video or anything I said, you can leave them below or contact me at 416-617-9997 or email me at homes@stevenson.ca. I hope this was a helpful video for you, and just a reminder, working with the Stevenson home selling team not only gets you amazing personalized service, but also a large portion of our proceeds is donated to the Children's Miracle Network and Sick Kids Hospital to help those children in need. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, stay safe and bye for now. Cheers.